Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere hot, really hot. The kind of dry, soul-thirsty heat where you can fry flatbread on stone steps and still be hungry afterward. You're standing at the edge of a vast desert in ancient Persia, around 500 BCE. The sun's just dipped below the horizon, but the ground still radiates the day's heat like a stubborn oven. The air smells of dust, dry straw, and distant smoke. And yet, you're craving something cold. A sorbet, maybe, or shaved ice with a drizzle of grape molasses and a splash of rose water. Unfortunately, there are no freezers here, not even an icebox, just camels, crickets, and the occasional sandstorm. You probably won't survive this, at least not with modern comfort levels. But luckily, you don't have to, because you're about to witness one of the most quietly astonishing feats of ancient engineering. How people in blistering climates, long before the electric fan or refrigeration coil, figured out how to make and store ice. Real ice. In the desert. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and what time it is where you're watching. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start walking along a dusty path toward the outskirts of an Achaemenid settlement. All around you, the earth is baked into hues of gold and terracotta. Palm trees rattle in the breeze, and off in the distance, children are chasing each other with clay jugs, sloshing water in rhythmic splashes. They know better than to spill any. It's precious. But what's even more precious tonight is the knowledge passed down through generations. How to trap cold air in the midst of summer. You arrive at a structure that looks like a giant, mud-plastered beehive rising out of the earth. Rounded, sloped, serene. Its domed top reflects the fading twilight in shades of apricot and mauve. This is a yakchal, which in Old Persian means ice pit. But calling it a pit is like calling the Great Wall of China a fence. You step closer. The base is wide, maybe 30 feet across. The walls curve up smoothly, narrowing like a funnel until they reach a capped opening at the very top. From the outside, it looks silent and unimpressive. But step through its narrow passage, cool, low, and shadowy, and the temperature instantly drops. You exhale, and for the first time today, you can almost see your breath. The inside is cavernous. Your sandals echo on the packed earth. Deep below, carved out of the ground, is a massive pit lined with an ancient waterproofing material made of ash, clay, goat hair, and lime. Historians still argue whether this mix was invented through careful chemistry or just stubborn trial and error, but the result is clear. These pits could store ice for months. You pause. Imagine the first time someone stood inside one of these, realizing that it actually worked. That ice left here in January would still be usable come August. That date syrup could be poured over chilled snow and served to honored guests, even as the desert blazed outside. And just as you're thinking about this miracle of desert ingenuity, a breeze filters in from a slit in the wall. Not a harsh gust, just a sigh of night air, funneled through channels designed not by luck, but by intense knowledge of fluid dynamics. Centuries before that term existed. Because here's the real trick. These yakchals weren't just cool because they were underground. They were part of a larger system, one that pulled in wind from tall towers, cooled it further as it passed over underground water channels called qanats, and directed it toward the storage chamber like a whispering lullaby. And that's where you'll go next. But for now, stay here. Breathe in the clay-dusty air. Marvel at how, thousands of years ago, Someone stood where you're standing and said, "Let's put ice here," and then made it happen. Outside, the stars are waking up, dotting the sky like slow blinking fireflies. Somewhere a reed flute plays, off-key and lonely. A dog barks once, then lies back down. In the pit, the air is still, cool, scented faintly with ancient memories, and maybe, just maybe, the ghost of a grape sorbet. You emerge slowly from the cool embrace of the yak chal, blinking under the moonlight. The air outside is still warm, but now you notice the breeze. It's not strong, but steady, like the desert's own exhale. You follow it uphill, past squat stone homes and little gardens protected by adobe walls, towards something that looks oddly like a chimney growing backward. Except it's not a chimney. It's a wind catcher. In Persian, it's called a bajir, literally, wind grabber. And tonight, it's doing exactly what its name promises. The tall tower rises above the rooftops, square and dignified, with open vents on every side. The inside, a labyrinth of angled vanes and passages that funnel air downward, not randomly, not chaotically, precisely, deliberately. This is ancient Persian HVAC. You step inside one of the buildings connected to the tower and immediately feel it. Coolness, surprising and serene. The warm air is drawn upward by pressure differences, while the cooler desert night air sinks downward through the bad gear. It's not freezing, no, but it's enough to sleep without sweating, enough to keep milk from spoiling before dawn, and certainly enough to turn the inside of a house into a kind of primitive walk-in fridge. Historians still argue whether these structures originated independently in different parts of the Middle East or spread outward from one central innovation hub like Persia. Either way, the Persian implementation remains one of the most refined. There are variations with internal water basins to cool the air further, ones connected to underground water channels that chill the incoming breeze, and even double-chambered designs that adjust to wind direction. And while it all sounds incredibly advanced, the real genius lies in how elegantly low-tech it is. No wires, no moving parts, just an understanding of how heat rises, how shadows fall, and how air behaves when given the right architectural nudge. As you stand in the gently humming silence of this mud brick room, the walls thick with centuries of lived-in warmth, you can almost hear the practical poetry of it all. Someone looked at a desert and said, "Fine, be hot, I'll still make a breeze." Outside, the moon glints off clay roof tiles. A family nearby is preparing for bed, their voices low and melodic, like a lullaby wrapped in vowels. Someone laughs quietly. Somewhere, a spoon taps against a ceramic bowl. And then, just when you're lulled by the stillness, you spot a small vent in the corner of the ceiling, angled precisely toward the prevailing wind. Cold air seeps down like a whisper, and that's when you realize this breeze isn't just accidental. It's curated, guided, crafted by hands that have never seen a modern thermostat, but knew somehow how to make you sigh in relief. The wind catchers weren't only in homes. You'd find them in caravanserais, those dusty roadside inns along ancient trade routes, where travelers from as far away as Greece or India would collapse in the shade, grateful for a cold jug of pomegranate juice and a little breeze. Or in mosques and palaces, where prayers and politics both unfolded under the shelter of chilled stone walls. And while it's tempting to romanticize this as the work of mystics and geniuses, the reality is more grounded and, honestly, more impressive. These were craftspeople, masons, and engineers with calloused hands and dust in their teeth. Trial and error was their guide, and when they got it right, they didn't write it in books. They just built another one. One of the fringe details that always raises eyebrows is how some badgers doubled as sound funnels. In certain palace complexes, it's said that whispers spoken into the vents could travel through the air ducts, reaching another room entirely. Useful for eavesdropping, or maybe for yelling at your kids without leaving your chair. Historians still debate whether this was by accident or design, but either way, it's a delicious little detail. The ancient world's coolest intercom system. Back outside, you find yourself standing on a rooftop beneath a stretch of stars that seem too numerous to count. The desert wind brushes your cheek. It's no longer a mystery. This air. It's been caught, tamed, cooled, all by a tower designed not to impress, but to ease. And that's something you'll see again and again in Persian architecture. Comfort through humility. Function wrapped in beauty. It's not flashy. It's not loud. It just works. Quietly, like the breeze you didn't know you were waiting for. You sit down, the rooftop still warm from the day's sun, and lean back against the parapet. Somewhere nearby, a donkey snorts. A kettle whistles faintly. The windcatcher murmurs its endless lullaby. And you just listen. Because for a people who lived in one of the harshest climates on Earth, the Persians found a way not just to survive, but to rest, to cool, and yes, to eat dessert. Now that you've felt the soft hush of a windcatcher and wandered the cool interior of a yakchal, it's time to look deeper. Literally. Because if you're wondering where ancient Persians got their ice from in the first place, the answer isn't magic. It's physics, patience, and a little bit of midnight choreography. You're back near the edge of town now, where the flat desert opens wide like a giant clay plate. The stars above twinkle sharp and clear, as if someone scraped them fresh. The night is colder than you'd expect, cold enough to see your breath if you exhale slowly. And that, dear listener, is exactly what the ancient Persians were counting on. See, they didn't just stumble across blocks of ice lying around. They made them. Out here, under open skies, in special shallow pools dug by hand and lined with waterproofing. These pools, sometimes several yards long, were placed strategically, away from heat-retaining walls, shaded from the wind, and exposed to the bitterest part of the winter night. Here's how it worked. During winter, desert temperatures often plummet below freezing after sunset, even if the days are warm. So these pools of still water, thin, shallow, and left uncovered, would freeze overnight. Just a delicate film at first, like glass frosting over. But layer by layer, night after night, the ice thickened. Workers would arrive before dawn, bundled in rough wool cloaks, their breath puffing like steam trains, and they'd begin to lift the ice, not with fancy tools, just wide flat trays, hands wrapped in linen, and careful teamwork. They'd break the slabs free, slide them across smooth ramps, and tuck them down into the yawning cold pits of the yakchal. Rinse, repeat, night after night. Historians still argue whether the water used was specially treated, filtered through sand, cooled in qanats first, or blessed in some way. But whatever the method, it worked. These pools became seasonal assembly lines for frozen treasure. And here's the quirky part. The work was often done in silence. Not for mystical reasons, but practical ones. Sound travels far in the open night, and in these precious freezing hours, distractions could mean cracked ice or ruined batches. So the workers moved in calm quiet, just the scrape of wooden trays, the sigh of breath, and maybe a few grunted jokes once the ice was safely packed away. Imagine it, a whole village coordinated around the moon cycle and the frost. No loud announcements, no schedules pinned to doors, just a rhythm passed from generation to generation. A grandfather teaching his grandson how to check ice thickness with his knuckle. A mother waking her daughter just before dawn to help with lifting. A line of silhouettes in the dark, moving ice as gently as bread. One fringe theory, still debated of course, is that some of the wealthier families had private freezing ponds, guarded by short walls or even shaded by date palms. These exclusive setups were whispered about in town, like luxury suites today. Did they really produce better ice? Probably not. But perception, then as now, was half the magic. You walk past one of the old pond sites now, empty and cracked from centuries of neglect. A few weeds curl through the dried mud, but if you close your eyes, you can still hear it. The hush of cold water stiffening into ice, the soft grunt of effort as it's lifted, the muffled thud as it disappears into the earth. And even though it's night, you can feel the warmth building beneath the surface. The desert doesn't stay cold for long. By midday tomorrow, the same place will feel like the inside of a bread oven. But tonight, the earth cooperates. It offers you this fleeting chill. In a world where refrigeration is a button you push, it's easy to forget how miraculous this used to be. Ice, in the desert, moved by hand, stored by science that didn't call itself science yet, and not for survival, for dessert. Because sometimes the human urge for a sweet treat is stronger than climate, stronger than logic. And if you're wondering what happened when the freeze failed, when the night didn't get quite cold enough, well, you're not alone. Historians still argue whether backup supplies were kept underground year-round, or if villages just had to cope with the occasional slushy disappointment. One surviving letter from a Persian courtier grumbles about sour melon and no snow, which is perhaps the 5th century BCE version of a bad Yelp review. But tonight, the freeze holds. The stars are bright, the air is crisp, and you swear you can smell something faintly sweet. Maybe grape molasses warming on a hearth, ready to drizzle over tomorrow's icy treat. You pull your cloak tighter, not because you're cold, but because something about this stillness makes you want to hold it close. The kind of stillness where ice forms under moonlight and nobody needs to say a word. You head back toward the Yakchal now, the cold pit of miracles you first stepped into, and this time you pay closer attention to the outside, the thick, sloped walls glowing faintly under the moon. It looks simple, unassuming, but these walls are not just decoration or haphazard piles of mud. No, they're thermal traps, calculated shields against the punishing sun. Because when it comes to storing ice in a desert, the real battle isn't freezing, it's keeping. The walls of a yakchal are often over 6 feet thick at the base, and they're not just any old bricks. They're made from a special material called saruj, a mixture of sand, clay, lime, egg whites, ash, and goat hair. Yes, egg whites and goat hair. It sounds more like a rustic omelet than construction material, but it worked. This plaster, when dried, became nearly waterproof, breathable, and extraordinarily resistant to temperature change. You run your hand along the surface, and it feels oddly smooth, like chalk polished by centuries. In the day, these domes reflect sunlight thanks to their pale color. At night, they radiate heat back out into the sky. And the conical shape? Not for looks. It's to minimize sunlight exposure and maximize airflow. Even the dome's angle plays a role in keeping the interior calm, shadowed, and cool. Imagine sweating over those math problems with only a stick in the sand and a few generations of wisdom. Historians still argue whether the architects behind the Yakchal were literate or simply guided by oral tradition and apprenticeship. But the math is baked into the walls, geometry with a side of genius. And it didn't just happen once. These structures appeared all over ancient Persia, from Yazd to Kerman, popping up like time-tested refrigerators with skyline flare. Now, step closer. You notice that the outer wall has vents, subtle, slotted openings to let trapped warm air escape while keeping cold air inside. You might never notice them unless you knew where to look. That's the magic. These designs didn't rely on brute force, but subtlety. A whisper, not a shout. And beneath your feet, deeper down than you thought, the pit drops low, up to 5 meters in some places. It was often dug directly into the ground, which helped insulate the bottom. It's like an ancient thermos flask, ice stored in the heart of the earth. One fringe detail you might enjoy. Some yakhchals had a built-in channel for melting ice to drain and refreeze, a kind of eco-friendly ice recycling system, not out of environmental concern, but practicality. Waste nothing. Even melting dessert water had its purpose. You imagine the workers arriving before dawn, opening the access hatch with stiff fingers and lowering a rope to retrieve a single glistening slab. They'd lift it out slowly, carefully, like a sacred object. Not because it was rare, it was just ice, but because the effort it took to keep it solid was a kind of communal ritual. Inside the yakhchal, time slows. The air is thick with stillness. Not dead, not empty, just settled. You sit on a cool stone ledge and close your eyes. The walls gently curve upward, sheltering you like a protective shell. You can hear the soft echoes of footsteps long gone, the scrape of stone bowls against the earth, maybe a quiet hum, someone singing to themselves as they work. This dome has weathered centuries of storms and scorching summers. Empires have risen and crumbled around it, but the yakhchal stands, because people still need cold things, even in a world on fire. And as your thoughts drift, you start to appreciate the materials in a new way. Mud, straw, hair, egg whites, all organic, all local, all renewable. Long before sustainability was a buzzword, it was just necessity. They built with what they had, and what they had was enough. There's something humbling about that. You don't need concrete, steel, or freon. Just a sharp understanding of where the sun hits, how the wind moves, and how a scoop of water behaves when left alone under the stars. You lean back against the curved wall, the surface cool against your shoulder blades. Overhead, a tiny breeze trickles in through the high dome vent, just enough to kiss your forehead. And suddenly, your craving for dessert isn't even about sugar. It's about reverence, the sheer grace of doing something hard, beautifully. A goat bleats somewhere outside. A rooster, confused by moonlight, lets out a sleepy crow. You smile in the dark. Even animals don't quite understand why the humans keep building these strange earthen domes. And yet, here they are, still standing, still chilling. It's the next morning now, just after sunrise, and you're walking through the shaded courtyard of a wealthy Persian household. The stones beneath your feet are still cool from the night, though you know they'll be scorching by noon. A servant passes you, balancing a brass tray with a ceramic bowl filled with something delicate, creamy, and lightly steaming in the chill of early air. You lean in. Is that saffron? Rosewater? A hint of pistachio? Yes, you've found the frozen desserts, or at least the distant ancestors of them. In elite households, the use of ice wasn't just practical, it was ceremonial, a soft flex of status. Look what we can do, it whispered. We can make the desert yield sweetness. You follow the scent through a narrow passage, into a shaded hall with painted beams and cushions strewn across low stone benches. Someone gestures for you to sit. You do, and in front of you appears a shallow bowl of pale golden slush. It glows like sunlight. You lift the spoon. It's faluda, or something like it. A very early version of the dish. rice starch noodles chilled with rosewater syrup, maybe a squeeze of grape juice if you're lucky. Historians still argue whether this dish, or its cousins, truly date back to the Achaemenid period or emerged fully in the later Parthian and Sasanian eras. The truth is, cold dishes like this existed in so many forms, icy, slushy, creamy, fruity, that it's hard to pin down who invented what. Persia may not have been the first to enjoy frozen treats, but they certainly made it an art. And here's a fun tidbit. Persian royalty were among the first to record having ice delivered for culinary pleasure, not just storage. Ice was considered so essential to luxury that some kings, Darius for instance, ordered icy concoctions served after particularly hot outdoor ceremonies. Imagine finishing a long, dusty procession in the blazing sun, and someone hands you sorbet. That's not just comfort, that's divine strategy. There's even a lingering theory, unconfirmed, but too good to ignore, that Persian courts once received shipments of snow packed in camel skin sacks, relayed relay style from colder mountain zones. It would be passed from runner to runner, camel to camel, like a dessert-based Olympic torch, losing a little with each leg, but always arriving cool enough to impress. And what about mangoes? You heard mention of those earlier. Could they have reached Persia in time for dessert duty? Maybe. Trade routes between India and Persia were active long before Alexander popped in to complicate things. Mangoes may have made the occasional guest appearance in elite dishes, carried west along with saffron, cinnamon, and the occasional diplomatic headache. But for the average person, fruit slush was more likely to be made from locally grown goodies, melons, grapes, pomegranates. The melon, in particular, was a star, chilled, sliced, and served with crushed mint or salted yogurt. It was the kind of food that reminded you of shade even when there wasn't any. You lift your imaginary spoon again and take another bite. The flavor's soft, almost shy. Not sugary like modern desserts, just fragrant. Cool. A pause between heat waves. Some noble families even had a designated cold steward whose entire job was to manage ice retrieval, dessert preparation, and dish timing. This person was not just a kitchen hand, they were a kind of early thermal technician. And yes, they were judged harshly if the ice arrived half melted. You glance around. The atmosphere here isn't loud or decadent. It's slow, intentional. The food is offered in small portions, savored between sips of tea or sour cherry juice. A boy fans the air gently near the open archway. Somewhere beyond, a fountain trickles, a low musical repetition that makes you want to lie down and drift. That's the real genius of this culture. They didn't just cool the food, they cooled the moment. Ice wasn't simply an ingredient. It was a vibe. Even in the bazaars, where merchants haggled and camels clomped through clouds of dust, you could find cold things in the summer, if you knew the right stalls. Cellars with clever ice chests buried below ground level, packed in straw and salt. Kids pressing their noses against clay jugs filled with chilled mulberry syrup. Grandmothers slipping frozen grape balls into their grandchildren's palms with a wink. And yet, despite how widespread these practices became, none of it felt rushed. No plastic spoons, no drive-through windows, just layers of care, of knowing that the best things, cold things, sweet things, take time. You finish the last of your imaginary dessert. A servant lifts the empty bowl wordlessly and retreats into the shade. A breeze picks up, rustling the grapevines overhead. You lean back, full not just with food, but with the sheer thoughtfulness of it all. Somewhere nearby, a child giggles, probably just tasted their first frozen melon. You smile. Welcome to ancient Persia, where even dessert was a team sport. By now, you've tasted the noble sorbet and stood inside the dome of ancient refrigeration. But what about the secret ingredient in any good ice cream fantasy? Dairy? You'd think it would be impossible to live with milk in a world where fridges haven't been invented. But you'd be wrong. Dead wrong. Because ancient Persians were not just ice whisperers, they were also churn champions. Let's start with the animals. Cows were around, sure, but they weren't the superstars of ancient Persian dairying. That title likely belonged to goats and camels. Goats for their adaptability. Camels because, well, they're camels. They live where even the goats give up. Camel milk, it turns out, keeps surprisingly well even in the heat. Thick, slightly salty, and rich in protein, it became the base for a whole range of cold and creamy experiments. You make your way now into a small village courtyard. A few women are crouched in a circle, sleeves rolled up, churning milk in tall clay jars wrapped in soaked linen to keep them cool. They're not using hand-cranked machines, no nostalgia-inducing connect slush. Instead, the jars are rocked gently back and forth, side to side, over and over again. It looks like a dance, like nursing a baby buffalo to sleep. The rhythm is slow, methodical, a lullaby in motion. Churning took time, hours sometimes. It was a communal act, then ensued between gossip and song, usually while other work continued. Historians still argue whether men participated in the process regularly or only during festivals and emergencies. But everyone, regardless of who churned, was invested in the results. And the result? Pure pashma, a sort of early milk sorbet, especially popular during festivals, or sometimes just solid rice, chilled yogurt mixed with herbs, salt, and a hint of ice. Not sweet like your modern desserts, more like savory snow, an acquired taste perhaps, but in a 105 degrees Fahrenheit shade, it might as well be magic. Here's a fun fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe Persian armies carried hardened, dried yogurt tablets, kind of like proto-ice cream jerky, which they would later rehydrate and chill if ice was available. Sounds unappetizing now, sure, but imagine you're in full armor, marching across scorched terrain, and someone hands you rehydrated salted dairy food. That's a battlefield luxury. And yes, these chilled dairy dishes weren't just for fun. They had purpose. Heat exhaustion was a real threat. Offering cold, lightly fermented dairy to a soldier or a farmer was a small act of kindness, a gesture that said, let's not let the sun win today. The process of cooling milk also taught people what not to do. Leave it out too long. Sour. Store it in a warm jar. Explodes. Bury it near a goat pen. Contamination city. So came generations of trial and error, testing which clays insulated best, which cloths wicked away just enough moisture, which herbs kept flies away. Entire families would guard their methods the way we guard grandma's secret lasagna recipe. And in the cities, dairy traders emerged, navigating heat and time like culinary ninjas. They packed their jars with straw, dampened with cold water, and sometimes traveled at night to preserve the chill. If you were lucky, they'd arrive just before midday with a little bowl of mastichiar, yogurt, cucumber, and mint, with a few slivers of ice still rattling at the bottom. Pure poetry, especially if you'd been sweeping a courtyard or hauling bricks all morning. As you sit now under an arched veranda, listening to the soft slosh of churned milk and the chatter of women comparing recipes and neighborhood drama, you begin to understand that refrigeration wasn't just about dessert. It was about relationships, about cooling what could be heated by conflict, or weather, or exhaustion. It was hospitality, served, chilled. And just imagine being a guest in a rural home, dust still clinging to your sleeves, throat dry, nerves buzzing from the road. And then someone appears with a bowl of saffron yogurt, cooled in last winter's ice. No fanfare, no explanation. Just the unspoken generosity of a people who learned long ago that surviving the desert meant learning how to make it sweeter. You smile now, hearing the laughter rise among the churners. One woman's jug has overthickened, and she pretends it's the fault of her sister's bad singing. They swat each other with linen towels, giggling. The jug tips. A splash of milk soaks the earth. They don't mind. There's always more milk, more ice, more mornings like this one. And somewhere, maybe not far off, another batch is being poured into a shallow tray and cooled under a date palm. A child waits beside it, clutching a spoon, hoping today's version tastes even better than yesterday's. You lean your head back, exhale. The breeze is rising, the milk's still churning, and the sun, though climbing, feels a little less threatening when you know that someone, somewhere, is turning it all into something cool. The sun is high now, and the air vibrates with heat. It's the kind of dry, searing warmth that makes you want to press your face against cool stone and hum until your bones relax. But just outside town, something unusual is happening. A group of people is gathering in the pre-dawn light, bundled in cloaks, their breath visible as they shuffle around long, shallow pits. You're about to witness one of ancient Persia's more extraordinary seasonal rituals, the night ice harvest. This isn't a fluke event. It's a carefully orchestrated operation, tuned to the rhythms of desert winter. The principle is deceptively simple. Shallow pools of water freeze more easily than deep ones. Expose them to the coldest part of the night sky in just the right conditions. Clear air, no wind, low humidity, and you get ice. Real, scrape it with a blade ice. The execution, though? That's a masterpiece of community choreography. You walk among the workers now. Some are spreading fresh water into the pools with flat wooden paddles. Others are checking the ice that formed the previous night, tapping it, listening for that brittle, almost musical crack that means it's thick enough to harvest. The youngest children are tasked with running messages or bringing warm tea. Everyone has a role, and everyone's moving with a kind of sleepy grace. Once the ice is ready, the teams move fast. Too slow, and the rising sun turns your efforts into a slush puddle. Men with straw-wrapped feet ease across the ice, gently lifting the fragile slabs with wide wooden scrapers. The blocks are stacked on reed mats, packed with insulating sawdust or old wool, and hauled away to the yak chal before the desert heat can even blink. It's a race against time, and yet no one's panicking. There's a rhythm to it. Quiet orders, hands passing tools. A goat bleats impatiently in the background, possibly annoyed no one's brought it a snack. Historians still argue whether this practice was entirely homegrown or adapted from earlier Mesopotamian cooling methods. Either way, by the time of the Achaemenid Empire, the Persians had perfected it. Some even suggest that villages would place polished ceramic discs around the pools to reflect additional night radiation and help water freeze faster, a kind of lunar turbocharging. You stoop beside one of the workers now. His hands are red from the cold, but he smiles as he slides a thin, gleaming sheet of ice into a straw basket. "Not bad for a desert," he says, without saying anything at all. Here's something else you might not expect. These ice harvesting sessions weren't just labor. They were events, community moments, quiet winter gatherings. Some regions held little sunrise celebrations afterward, with dates, nuts, and warm flatbread served beside steaming cups of barley tea. Children who helped got first taste of the chilled fruit the next day. One charming but probably exaggerated folk tale tells of a young girl who accidentally fell asleep beside a freezing pool and woke up cocooned in frost, then grew up to become a local herbalist who specialized in chilled tonics. Whether true or not, the story lingers, like the frost itself. You walk now with the final ice haulers. Their baskets bounce lightly against their backs as they trudge toward the Yakshal. Their path is well worn, a narrow track edged with stone markers, leading from the low plains to the domed mouth of the ancient ice pit. And as you follow them, you realize this isn't just about desert anymore. This is about control. In a landscape where so little could be bent to human will, where the sun scorched, the winds howled, and water was a gift wrapped in sand, this was control. Ice made by hand, carried by foot, tucked away for a future that might need coolness more than warmth. At the base of the Yakchal, the workers pass their baskets to the pit attendants, men with strong arms and soft voices who lower the ice gently, lovingly, into the deep chamber below. No ceremony, no applause, just quiet satisfaction, a job done right. And then, as the sun finally breaks over the hills and throws gold across the sand, the workers stretch their backs and breathe out. One or two lean against the base of the dome, their eyes closing just for a moment. There's still tea to drink, still goats to milk, still firewood to stack before nightfall. But for now, the ice is saved, the chill is preserved, and in a world on fire, that's more than enough. You sit beside them, sipping your imaginary tea. The breeze dances lightly across your face. Somewhere inside the Yakshal, the ice dreams of rosewater and melon. Now that you've seen the frosty magic unfold, it's time to follow the ice beyond the pit, because in ancient Persia, frozen water wasn't just stored, it was sold. You step into the heart of a small town bazaar, mid-morning. The sun is starting to flex its muscles overhead, and already merchants are tugging back woven awnings, revealing baskets of figs, bolts of dyed linen, and piles of cumin-scented flatbread. But your attention is drawn to something less obvious, a small clay stall tucked in the corner, shaded and unassuming. There's a man seated there, cross-legged, with a simple painted sign above him. Yak for sale. Ice, straight from the Yakchal. Welcome to the world of the ancient Persian ice vendor, a figure caught somewhere between utility worker and wizard. He opens a box insulated with straw and shows you the goods. Inside, small chunks of ice, wrapped in cloth and still sweating from the walk. You might think, what's the big deal? But remember, there's no electricity here. That meltwater dripping onto the stone floor, that's money. These vendors, known in some dialects as yakforish, often worked for elite households or religious institutions, but many were independent contractors. They'd get up long before dawn, retrieve ice from the community yakchal, wrap it in thick felt or padded crates, and head to the market before the sun turned everything into soup. Historians still argue whether ice vendors paid a tax or tribute to use public yakchals. Some suggest they did, essentially renting shelf space in the dome. Others argue that ice access was more communal, with vendors paying through service, upkeep, or family connections. You notice now how many different people stop by the vendor's stall. A housewife buying a handful of chips to chill yogurt for guests. A scholar who wants his ink pots kept cool so they don't dry out mid-scroll. A young boy sent by a baker to retrieve just enough ice to keep butter from melting during kneading. That's right. Ice wasn't only for sorbets and fancy melon slices. It had domestic uses, practical ones, cheese storage, butter softening, wine cooling, even perfume making, since cold temps helped stabilize delicate ingredients. The man behind the stall? He's more like a mobile climate technician. And this wasn't only happening in cities. Rural villages often had their own ice dealers who delivered door to door. They'd go house by house with satchels of crushed ice, ringing a small bell. The sound was distinct from the bread vendor's call or the fishmonger's shout. It meant something better. Relief is here. Here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some villages even had ice deposit accounts. You could prepay for your household's share of the winter harvest, marked with a clay token or a palm-carved slip. Lose it, and no dessert for you. And yes, like any good supply and demand model, prices fluctuated. After a warm winter, ice was scarce. Vendors got picky. One cheeky tale tells of a noble who tried to bribe a yakfarush for an extra serving of chilled melon and was rebuffed because he hadn't paid his spring dues. Bureaucracy, even in the freezer aisle. You sit near the stall and watch transactions unfold. Ice is chipped, weighed, handed off in linen wraps. Nobody wastes a drop. It's not just commerce. It's ceremony. A reminder that the cold is always fleeting and worth savoring. But beyond the stall, a larger picture forms. Ice supported a whole microeconomy. Craftsmen who made insulated crates, children who were paid to fan storage chambers, farmers who traded bundles of mint in exchange for just a half-hour's chill. There was even, in some cases, what we might call ice diplomacy. A governor gifting frozen fruit syrup to a rival city as a soft show of strength. "We have ice," it said wordlessly. "What do you have?" And yet, the vendors themselves rarely flaunted their role. You watch the man now, wrapping his last few chunks for a client. He doesn't boast, he doesn't upsell. He just nods, collects a few coins, and recloses the lid of his crate with quiet satisfaction. The day grows hotter. The marketplace buzzes louder. But for a moment, your little patch of stone stays cool. Ice glistens inside the straw box. A girl skips past with a pouch of chilled tamarind syrup, humming to herself. And you? You realize that frozen dessert in ancient Persia wasn't a luxury in the modern sense. It was an infrastructure, invisible, woven into the rhythms of daily life. A gift pulled from the earth, harvested by hand, sold with quiet pride. You reach into your own mind's pocket now and pull out a few imaginary coins. You buy a single palm-sized sliver, cool enough to fog your fingers. You press it to your forehead, sighing deeply. Around you, the bazaar swirls. But your little moment? It stays perfectly, gloriously, chilled. You've wandered through wind catchers, frozen milk dances, and the quiet commerce of the ice trade. But now it's time to explore a cooler kind of sacred space. Not just spiritually cool, but literally refreshing. Because in ancient Persia, holy places weren't all fire and brimstone. Some were quiet sanctuaries of shade, scent, and airflow. You're walking now along a stone path, following the sound of trickling water. It's not a stream. It's too controlled, too purposeful. You arrive at the entrance of a temple courtyard, perhaps Zoroastrian in origin. Before you even cross the threshold, you feel it, that blessed, tangible drop in temperature, the kind that makes your scalp relax and your shoulders stop pretending they need to be earrings. Inside, the air smells of cool stone, damp clay, and something sweet, burning sandalwood maybe. The space is simple but striking. Arched doorways, pools of still water, and a quiet so powerful it feels engineered. That's because it is. Temples and sacred complexes were often designed not only for spiritual alignment, but for climate control. Priests weren't just theologians, they were keepers of comfort. And nowhere was this more evident than in how they channeled water, air, and shade. One feature that catches your eye now is a chahar bag, a quadrilateral garden divided by 4 water channels. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice. The layout helped cool the air and irrigate shade trees like plane and cypress, which in turn created what you might call an ancient natural misting system. When a breeze passed through the damp garden, it emerged cooler, gentler, an accidental wind spa. Historians still argue whether these layouts were intended purely for pleasure or if they held cosmological meaning, mirroring the 4 rivers of paradise perhaps. But either way, the effect is the same. It's cool, it's serene, and it makes you want to lie down and listen to the doves for the next few hours. You dip your hand into the water, just to see. It's crisp, maybe from a qanat-fed basin below the temple itself. These underground channels carried water from distant mountains into cities and sacred sites, moving unseen and uncelebrated until they surfaced in moments like this, bubbling up through marble fountains or shallow reflecting pools. There's a lovely fringe theory that some Zoroastrian priests use these cool waters to refrigerate ceremonial items: rose petals for incense, pomegranate wine, even clay tablets that might crack if left in the sun. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet, precise art of not letting things spoil. You find a spot beneath the stone portico now, leaning against a column carved with floral motifs. A boy walks past, balancing a tray with 2 small bowls, one for the priest, one for the caretaker. Both contain a soft, jiggly concoction, a kind of early saffron pudding, served with just a spoonful of shaved ice, a sacrament for the senses. And the best part? No shouting, no bells, just soft sandals against stone, the hush of wind through fig trees, and the drip-drip of meltwater into a hidden clay drain. You close your eyes for a moment, and your mind drifts. You imagine the temple during a festival, flowers strung across the arches, the water dyed faintly pink with flower essence. Guests would be welcomed not just with prayer, but with comfort. Cool drinks, iced pomegranate slush, the desert's approval in digestible form. And here's where it gets even better. These principles didn't stay in temples, they spread. The architecture of stillness made its way into palaces, bathhouses, even middle-class homes. Shade became sacred. So did fountains. And everywhere you went, a tiny echo of temple coolness followed you, like a borrowed whisper from the gods. One scholar once mused that ancient Persian architecture was designed for silence and softness. You get it now. It wasn't about grandeur. It was about relief. About knowing the sun would scorch but giving people one place, just one, where they could breathe cold air and remember what it meant to feel held. As you sit there now, a bird lands on the edge of the fountain. It dips its beak into the pool, flutters once, then settles. You and the bird, just 2 desert wanderers sharing a sip of peace. The sun hasn't stopped rising, and soon this sanctuary will warm too. But for now, it holds. The stone stays cool, the air stays slow, and the breeze that passes through the garden still smells faintly of myrtle and mint. You open your eyes. The priest is watching you from the inner threshold. He doesn't speak, he just nods. Once, slowly. You nod back. You've learned what you needed here. You stand, stretch, and step quietly back into the light, your body cooler than it was, and your thoughts quieter still. You've wandered palaces and chilled temples, but now you're about to experience something far more dangerous. Dinner with Persian nobility. Okay, fine. Maybe not dangerous, but you'd better bring your best behavior. This isn't a rowdy feast. It's a well-choreographed ballet of fans, fig jam, and iced melon. You're standing now in a long courtyard lined with latticed windows, where the shadows play across patterned tiles like they're whispering secrets. Musicians pluck quietly at zithers under pomegranate trees. The whole space smells like honeyed almonds and rose vinegar. A young servant beckons, and you're led to a low table set with bowls of chilled yogurt soup and tiny golden spoons. Welcome to the heart of ancient desert dining etiquette. It's the middle of summer, and the noble family hosting this banquet has gone to tremendous lengths to keep things cool. First of all, the dining area has been staged near a qanat-fed fountain, strategically placed to produce evaporative cooling as breezes pass across the surface. Latticed panels diffuse the sunlight into geometric fragments. Beautiful, yes, but also designed to limit heat. And the food? It's a sensory journey, carefully calibrated for climate. First comes abdu kiar, a cucumber and mint yogurt soup served cold, with petals of ice floating like little edible boats. Then perhaps a rice dish cooked with barberries and cardamom, paired with sharbat, a syrupy drink, watered down and poured over crushed ice from the yakchal. And here's the kicker. You're expected to eat slowly. The idea isn't to gorge, it's to stay cool, to give your body time to settle, to savor. Even chewing too fast in this heat is considered unsophisticated, which is convenient really, because the more slowly you eat, the more chances you have to steal another bite of honeyed melon or iced rosewater slush. A servant glides past with a massive fan made of woven palm leaves, wafting gentle currents of air toward the guests. Not everyone gets their own breeze. You earn it, by rank or wit, or maybe just by knowing how to compliment the host's pickled fig recipe without sounding like you're trying too hard. Historians still argue whether fans were used exclusively for the elite, or if middle-class households also had fanning rituals. Some accounts suggest that in wealthier cities, there were even designated fan boys, young attendants trained not to fan too fast, which was rude, or too slow, which was sweaty. Think of them as the original HVAC technicians with better posture. You lift your cup of sharbat now, noticing how the ice has started to melt just slightly, sending a thin stream of sweetness swirling through the water. It's cold, fragrant, and subtle. No neon green slush here, just flavor that lingers like polite conversation. Across the table, a noble woman gently dabs her forehead with a linen cloth scented with something citrusy. Maybe bergamot? You try to copy her exact motion and accidentally knock over a candied apricot. The servant nearby doesn't scold you, just replaces it without a word. Still, your dinner cred just took a hit. And don't even think about asking for more ice unprompted. In some elite circles, the amount of ice in your dish was like the volume on a stereo. Too much, and you were considered uncultured. Too little, and people worried you might faint. The balance was everything. Here's a fringe detail worth whispering. Some nobles, it's said, perfumed their ice before serving it. Imagine a bowl of chilled apple slices over jasmine-infused snow. Not for taste, really, just for vibe. Because when you have that much control over temperature, why not add fragrance to the mix? And as the meal winds down, the host lifts a carved cherrywood bowl from the table's center. Inside, the pièce de résistance, ice slivers drizzled with honey and topped with crushed pistachios and violets. The room collectively leans forward, not out of hunger, but admiration. It's the edible version of applause. You're given a small scoop. You let it melt slowly on your tongue. The honey thick, the ice sharp, the flowers almost ticklish on your palate. Around you, the others are doing the same. No clinking spoons, just quiet appreciation. Then comes a moment you didn't expect. Silence. Everyone just Sits, eyes half closed, ice bowls empty. The breeze from the fan passes over you like a sigh, and you realize that this is the Persian version of a standing ovation. Not noise, not praise, just stillness. The feast concludes with a ritual hand washing. Rosewater poured from a tall ewer over your fingers, followed by a soft linen cloth. One final act of cooling before your return to the sun-baked world outside. As you step back into the light, the heat surprises you. Had it always been this hot? You fan yourself with your hand, trying not to look obvious. But it doesn't matter. The coolness from the meal lingers in your skin, your breath, your thoughts. You walk slowly, your stomach full, your mind quieter than before. You've eaten with royalty. You've sipped ice from a sacred dome. And you've survived the unwritten rules of ancient air-conditioned hospitality. Not bad for a desert dinner. You're back on the road again, walking along a dusty track that stretches into the horizon like a faded ribbon. To your left, the desert hums. To your right, a line of travelers approaches, men on horseback, a few tired camels, and something unexpected, a courier carrying a sealed urn, cradled in a padded sling. At first, you assume it's perfume, or medicine, or maybe one of those bizarre tax documents written on goatskin. But no, it's ice. Or at least, it was when they left the last station. Welcome to the chilly underbelly of the Achaemenid Empire's postal system, a logistical marvel that may have done more than carry messages. It may have helped transport ice and even cold treats across hundreds of miles. You're walking now beside a dusty way station known as a chaparkhane. It's simple. Just a few clay buildings, a small stable, and one large, cool underground storage pit where riders could rest, horses could be swapped, and, occasionally, precious cargo like chilled beverages or perfumed snow could be handed off to the next courier. Historians still argue whether these stops were used deliberately for cooling food, or if that was a clever secondary use. Most records point to a system optimized for speed and reliability. Royal messages could travel from one end of the empire to the other in a matter of days thanks to a relay system that would make any modern courier blush. But here's where the ice comes in. There are accounts, scattered, half legend, half logistics, that suggest small quantities of ice or snow were occasionally packed in sawdust and straw and passed from station to station. Not in giant quantities, no, but enough to deliver chilled treats, medicinal compresses, or even symbolic gifts, like a royal cooling token from Persepolis to a governor sweating in Susa. Think about it. A kingdom this vast, stretching from modern-day Turkey to parts of India, didn't just run on conquest, it ran on coordination. And if you can coordinate ice delivery in a desert empire, what can't you do? As you rest at this way station, a young rider unpacks his satchel. Inside, a clay jar with condensation still clinging to its sides. It's passed carefully to a steward who opens it with reverence. Inside, a slush of honey and citrus still cool to the touch. It's destined for someone important down the road, someone who's probably already picturing the first icy sip while sweating through their robes. And yes, there were failures, heat waves, thieves, goats. One particularly funny tale from a village archive tells of a courier who delivered a pot of ice slush that had completely melted, but rather than admit defeat, he served it as royally infused drinking water and insisted it was intentional. Bold move. There's even a bit of fringe speculation about ice diplomacy, that certain governors were sent iced delicacies not just as a gift, but as a flex. "Look how far we've mastered the land," it whispered. "We can carry snow across the empire. We can cool the sun. You imagine for a moment being one of those recipients, sitting in a shaded courtyard, feeling the walls radiating heat, when someone arrives with a sealed urn wrapped in silk and straw. You open it. Inside, a handful of crushed ice soaked in rose syrup. It doesn't matter if it's half melted, it's ice. And in this moment, that's everything. And just like that, the empire feels a little smaller, a little more connected. Like the wind that passes through Connaughts, the chill of this snow is a message in itself. We're thinking of you. Stay cool. You watch now as the next rider sets off. He's fast, efficient. Somewhere behind him, a bag sloshes faintly. It might be melted by the time he arrives. But that's the risk. That's the beauty. The ice may not last, but the effort? That's what impresses people. You finish your cup of warm barley water, no ice in this stop sadly, and stand. The road calls again, stretching ahead in lazy curves. But you walk lighter now, thinking of all those jars passed hand to hand, across deserts and oases, each carrying the briefest whisper of winter. Even here, in the cradle of the sun, the empire made room for cold. You've journeyed across royal roads, survived noble dinners, and sipped citrus slush with ancient couriers. But don't get too comfortable. Because now we turn to the real nemesis of the Persian ice dream. Not wars, not fire, not even the sun itself. No, tonight's foes are far more everyday. Behold the enemies of ice. You're crouched beside a yakchal at high noon. The air ripples. The dome reflects heat like a defiant turtle shell. But inside, the precious harvest from months of winter labor sleeps quietly in the dark. Or at least it should. A small commotion erupts. Someone is shouting. A clay lid has been left ajar. The air inside has warmed slightly, and that means melting. Disaster. Not catastrophic yet, but it's enough to panic the overseer, who hurries to reseal the hatch, muttering about careless cousins and ruined sherbet. Because if there's one thing ancient Persians knew, it's that a block of ice has more enemies than a provincial governor with unpaid taxes. First, goats. Yes, goats. Somehow, despite all their genius, Persians never fully solved the problem of opportunistic livestock. If a yakchal or shallow ice pit wasn't properly fenced, you could be sure that at least one curious goat would come sniffing around. There are even rumors, half humorous, half resigned, of goats learning to paw open storage crates and chew through linen wraps. Not for the ice itself, but for the sweet syrup sometimes drizzled on top. Second, gossip. Sounds ridiculous, right? But in smaller communities, gossip could derail ice management faster than a heat wave. Let's say the local priest was gifted the last of the rose-flavored ice, and the widow next door finds out. Outrage brews. Accusations fly. Someone accidentally delays the next ice harvest to punish the favoritism. You might laugh, but remember, ice wasn't just food. It was status. A melting symbol of who mattered and who didn't. Historians still argue whether these small acts of ice sabotage were widespread or just the stuff of village folktales. But one clay tablet from the Elamite region does record a fine for misuse of stored water during cooling time. That's the ancient equivalent of someone unplugging your freezer to charge their oil lamp. Third, dust storms. Not romantic, not mysterious, just hot, blinding, gritty, wind-borne terror. A well-placed dust storm could coat storage pools in grime, clog vents in the wind catchers, or worse, bury the top of a yakchal entirely, turning it into a slow-baking sand oven. Crews had to act fast, fanning entrances, brushing off vents, and sometimes even packing extra mud on the outside to prevent internal heat transfer. Counterintuitive? Yes. But if the wall's outer layer baked into a crust, it could actually help insulate the ice within. Here's a fringe hazard: bored children. In towns with limited entertainment, a yakchal could look awfully tempting. Cool, dark, mysterious. What better place to play? Some stories describe kids sneaking into the pit, borrowing a handful of slush, and sneaking it back out to make icy pebble balls. Adorable? Maybe. But the melt damage could be serious. Some communities even posted guards, or more realistically, very stern grandmothers, to shoo away would-be mischief makers. Even insects weren't to be underestimated. Bees loved the scent of sweet syrup. Ants would swarm spilled sharbat. And in regions near marshy qanats, mosquitoes occasionally laid eggs in poorly cleaned basins. It wasn't just about keeping things cold. It was about keeping them clean. And don't even start on the heat waves. When a freak hot spell arrived in early spring, it could ruin weeks of carefully stored ice. Some households resorted to wrapping blocks in multiple layers of goat wool, then burying the whole bundle under damp sand. Was it effective? Sometimes. Was it hygienic? Let's just say ice was always rinsed before serving. You sit now with a group of storage workers, resting in the scant shade beside the dome. They're passing a shared jug of barley water and taking turns swatting flies. One of them, an older man with a laugh like gravel, is recounting the time a merchant claimed he tamed the ice demon by singing to the yakchal. Everyone chuckles. It probably didn't work. But you sense a tiny kernel of truth. It wasn't just labor that protected the ice. It was attention, constant, careful vigilance. Because in a world without thermostats, ice management was stress management. One bad hour could undo an entire season of effort. And yet, people kept doing it. They kept refining the walls, patching the vents, designing better straw baskets. Not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. You glance at the dome, where a small bird has landed and tilted its head, curious. Inside that mound of earth and lime and goat hair is a treasure more fleeting than gold. Cold. And somehow, despite the goats, the storms, the children, and the heat, it's still there. The desert sun dips low again, casting long blue shadows over the sand. As the light softens, so too does the history. Because tonight, you won't be walking with Persian couriers or temple gardeners. You'll be joining an outsider, an ancient traveler whose curiosity was as boundless as the empire itself. His name? Herodotus, Greek historian, occasional embellisher, lover of odd details, and one of the first foreigners to try and describe Persian cooling techniques in writing. You find yourself sitting cross-legged in the corner of a caravanserai, nestled beside a mosaic-tiled fountain. Traders chatter quietly over their stews. The camels are finally quiet, and somewhere nearby, a scroll is being unfurled. Herodotus may never have seen a yakachal with his own eyes. Historians still argue about that, but he certainly heard about them. And if there's one thing he liked more than a good fact, it was a juicy exaggeration. He wrote of Persian nobility sending snow from mountain peaks to summer palaces, packed in wool-lined boxes and carried by swiftest men on foot. He described banquet drinks that stayed chilled, no matter the hour. And he claimed Persian kings had such control over nature, they could bind the sun itself in cloth and mud. Dramatic, absolutely, but not entirely wrong. You leaf through his imagined observations, and between the poetic liberties, something real glows through: awe. Herodotus was clearly stunned by the sheer practicality wrapped in elegance. He didn't fully understand the wind catchers, but he wrote admiringly of towers that breathe like beasts. He compared qanats to underground rivers built by hands unseen. And though he probably didn't grasp how the yakchals worked, he marveled that a people could sip snow while wearing sandals. It's not just Herodotus. Other Greek and Roman writers also reported whispers of Persian ice technology. Some believed it was magic. Others thought Persians had hidden glaciers, accessible only to royalty. One particularly grumpy Roman claimed Persians feigned winter in their wine cellars, which, frankly, sounds like a compliment in disguise. You lean back now, sipping a cup of something grape-flavored and tepid, not quite what Herodotus described, but close enough. Nearby, a storyteller is regaling a group of travelers with his own take on Persian ice. This version includes snow dragons, a fireproof mule, and a yakchal that doubles as a secret entrance to the underworld. Nobody's interrupting him. Why would they? Facts are important, but storytelling, that's where the memory sticks. And this is the funny thing. As advanced as Persian refrigeration was, it was always on the edge of belief for outsiders. It felt implausible. Cool air, on command, ice in the desert. Even today, when you explain it to someone for the first time, they squint and say, "Wait, what?" But it's true. It was true when Herodotus heard it. It was true when confused Roman tourists squatted in temple courtyards and fanned themselves with bark leaves, wondering how the air felt so nice. And it's true now, as you sit here, centuries later, following the faint chalk outlines of long-gone ice routes with your eyes. Here's a fringe little artifact for your imagination. A cracked amphora recovered from the ruins of Persepolis, lined with a residue of honey, pomegranate juice, and, oddly enough, traces of fine straw. Ice storage jar? Possibly. Herodotus would have had a field day. Of course, you have to take ancient travel accounts with a grain of salt, or in this case, maybe a pinch of shaved ice. Herodotus once claimed that Ethiopians lived to 120 by eating boiled meat and drinking milk with gold flakes. He wasn't exactly peer-reviewed. Still, his enthusiasm helps us see something valuable. Not just the facts, but the feeling they created. Foreigners came to Persia and found more than grand palaces or strange rituals. They found comfort, climate control, intentional ease. And when they went home, they told everyone they'd just seen the impossible. You smile, watching the stars blink into being above the courtyard. Herodotus is long gone. His scrolls are probably misfiled somewhere in the afterlife. But his awe lingers, and you suspect if he were here now, he'd sit down beside you and whisper, "Wait until you hear about the melon sherbet." You'd tell him it's real. You'd pass him a bowl. And maybe, for once, he'd get it right. You leave behind the echo of Herodotus's wide-eyed wonder and begin walking through a much quieter stretch of desert, where time no longer seems to care about names or nations. The empire is long gone. The banquet halls are dust. But something remarkable still remains, the legacy of Persian cooling. At first, it feels like you're walking through silence, but then you begin to see the shapes. Distant domes on the horizon, squat and sun-bleached. These aren't ruins. These are descendants. Because Persian cooling technology didn't die, it traveled, and its footprints are scattered across 1,000 years of architecture, from the palaces of Mughal India to the homes of North Africa. Wherever the idea of graceful chill took root, Persia had already planted a seed. You stop beside a building in Yazd, centuries newer than Darius, but still shaped by his engineer's wisdom. Its yakchal dome is intact, flanked by tall windcatchers, badgirs, rising like quiet sentinels. The channels below still hum with cool air. The inner pit, though no longer used for ice, stays remarkably cool in the high noon heat. Historians still argue whether these architectural techniques moved east through trade or conquest, or if they sprang up organically in each region through shared needs. Either way, it's clear. Persian cooling inspired. You follow the wind, literally, into the Indian subcontinent, where the Mughals adapted wind catcher principles into their summer palaces. Ever visited the Red Fort in Delhi? Those lattice screens and cross-ventilated rooms? All echoes of earlier Persian principles. There's even evidence that small versions of yakchals existed in Mughal gardens, used to keep desserts and drinks cool during warm evenings under the stars. Then south to the Persian Gulf, where merchants built sarouj-lined cisterns that kept drinking water cool in the heat. Farther west, the knowledge touched Egypt and Morocco, where wind towers emerged, not as copies, but cousins. Some historians claim that 9th century Baghdad had entire districts cooled by qanats and strategically placed ventilation shafts, a kind of urban-scale chill zone. One delightful fringe example? In medieval Andalusia, some court gardens featured cooled marble benches with air pumped beneath them through underground aqueducts. Did someone read a Persian scroll and get inspired? Or was it just the logical next step in a very hot world? Nobody knows, but Persia's fingerprints are there, smudged softly across time. And it wasn't just structures, even recipes traveled. You find yourself in a Mughal kitchen now. A cook is stirring a creamy dessert over a low flame, kulfi, and tucking it into an earthen mold packed with ice and salt. It's not Persian falude, not exactly, but it's related. You taste the saffron, the cardamom, the shared instinct to sweeten something against the heat. Even in the 19th century, European travelers arriving in Persia were startled to find ice in the middle of summer. Unnatural, one called it. Miraculous, said another. But the locals? They just shrugged. This wasn't magic. It was memory. Generations of slow, careful learning passed down in clay, straw, and salt. You return now to that dome in Yazd and walk around it slowly, your hand trailing the warm wall. Children are playing nearby. They don't know they're near a 1,000-year-old refrigerator. To them, it's just part of the landscape, a place where cats hide in the shade, where grandmothers whisper gossip on hot afternoons. And maybe that's the most beautiful part. The legacy of Persian cooling isn't enshrined in museums or gilded scrolls. It's lived in cool courtyards, in bowls of sharbat, in the quiet relief of stepping into a room where the breeze just knows what to do. You sit beside the dome, and a young boy offers you a small clay cup. It's filled with something gently sweet, pale, milky, dotted with herbs. You sip. It's cold, not icy, but refreshing in that intentional way. You nod your thanks. The boy smiles and runs off to join his friends. You're left with the taste, the breeze, and the dome's soft curve against the sky. Legacies don't always roar. Sometimes they whisper through walls and ride on wind. Sometimes they cool the air in a sunburnt square. Sometimes they slip into a drink and disappear with a smile. You lean back, eyes closed. The dome behind you hums faintly with wind. And somewhere, far across time, an ancient architect grins. His design still works. You rise from your resting place beside the dome, brushing sand from your robes as the sky deepens into its velvet blues. It's nearly night again, and the breeze that's curling through the alleys has changed. Softer now, cooler. The desert's slow apology for the day's heat. There's one last place to visit. You're walking toward a yakchal on the edge of a forgotten village, where the dome rises half swallowed by time. It's quieter here. No chatter, no goats, no markets. Just wind and dust and a soft, earthy silence. This yakchal has been long abandoned. No ice in its belly, no bundles of straw or barrels of syrup. But somehow, its presence still feels gentle. You pass through the low stone arch and step into the shadowed interior. It's cool. Not cold, but cooler than outside. The air is still. Your breath echoes. You sit on a stone ledge and look upward. The domed ceiling curves above you like a sleeping giant's ribcage. Cracks trace its surface like ancient veins. A few birds have nested in the upper vents. The pit below is empty, just a bowl of earth now, rimmed with roots and fragments of pottery. And yet, there's something sacred about this stillness, something slow and whole, because in this forgotten yakchal, with its fractured walls and sun-bleached memories, the story of human patience hums like a low drumbeat. Thousands of years ago, someone dug this pit with their hands, layered mud and hair, shaped the angles to catch the wind, all for ice, all for a little chill in a burning world. And you followed that thread all the way here, from wind catchers to sherbet bowls, from goat interference to imperial sorbet diplomacy. You run your fingers along the wall. Bits flake away, soft as powder. You press your palm flat against it. The temperature is just cool enough to remind you of everything this dome once held: winter's breath, summer's hope, a village's patience. Outside, the stars are blinking into position. The world turns a little slower. Someone in the distance is playing a flute, off-key, earnest. The wind smells like dry herbs and memory. You look down into the pit one last time. It's empty now. But in your mind's eye, you see it full. Glittering blocks of ice wrapped in straw, stacked with love. Someone laughing over a spoonful of frozen rosewater. A child dancing with a cup of melon slush, lips purple with syrup. Even in ruin, this place remembers. And now, so do you. You stand slowly. Stretch. Your body hums with stories. You don't need to speak them. You've lived them. You've felt the wind in your sleeves, the weight of a shaved ice scoop, the anxiety of a goat too close to the vent. You walk out into the desert night. The stars are waiting. The dome behind you fades into silhouette, a cool memory against the warmth of the earth. It worked, you know. The yakchal, the wind catchers, the whole improbable idea. It all worked. They didn't just survive the heat. They met it with grace, with ingenuity, with dessert. And you? You carry that grace with you now, tucked behind your ribs, chilled and quiet. And now, you're still. There's no rush. The wind has settled into its rhythm. You can feel it brushing softly across your skin, slow, dry, but not harsh, just enough to lull you. You're not walking anymore. You're just lying here, wherever you are, bed, couch, maybe even the floor, with your body sinking into stillness. Your breath slows. The heat of the day, real or imagined, has faded, replaced with the gentle hum of memory. You're back inside the yakchal, not the one full of chatter and workers, but the quiet one. The empty dome where the silence is soft, and the walls seem to remember the sound of snow sliding into place. Let your body melt into that cool air. No effort, no need to hold on. The night doesn't need your attention. It's got its own rhythm. The stars are already keeping watch. The earth will turn without you. You did enough today. And long before there were refrigerators and air conditioners, people sat just like this, eyes half closed, listening to the wind slip through vents and the meltwater trickle into the earth. It's all the same now. You're not separate from them. You're resting in the same air. So let your eyelids grow heavy. Let the warmth leave your shoulders your hands, your feet. Let the cool seep in, not icy, not sharp, just gentle, like the last bite of a frozen pomegranate sorbet. There's nothing left to do, nothing left to remember. Just rest. The wind will keep whispering, long after you've drifted off. Sweet dreams.